everybody. Welcome to the September 7th Zeitgeist Movement Global Radio Show podcast. Hope everyone's doing well out there. I'm a bit lackluster today. I apologize. We're inching into the Los Angeles Zeitgeist Media Festival, and it's just been absolutely insane. This has been beyond my experience, so it's going to be incredible, but the amount of development and preparation for a Hollywood event with so many performers for an 8-hour run, you can probably figure, anyone that's been in that type of position, it's not easy. But I did want to do this radio show to talk about that a little bit and a number of other issues that I think are important to discuss that are happening. And actually the first thing I'd like to go into has to do with the renovation of the ZeitgeistMovement.com, the main global site, and eventually future renovations perhaps of many of the chapter sites out there, creating a consistent structure or even a unified structure. There's been a lot of talk over the course of the past few months by many different people with a lot of great ideas about technical possibilities for this sort of Zeitgeist network, if you will, unifying sites, creating logins that work with all sites and things of such. Now, I'm not going to go on too much I'm not going to go on too many criticisms or praise of such issues, but I want to bring everything back in to a particular utility of what is the ZeitgeistMovement.com. The ZeitgeistMovement.com, it really is a data center. It's really there for information to be presented. And this is what the new site is going to be as far as data. The infrastructure can be evolved as we go on, but the new site is going to be a place where people will come back to it to check for updates and news, newsletter updates, press release updates, town hall updates, new audio-visual materials. It will be basically a kind of a typical site you see now traditionally, where you have certain rotating attributes that come on when a new user comes in. There's certain things that are dynamic. The whole point of this is, as I mentioned, to get people to want to come back to it, even those that are not interested in the movement. There might be news, such as feeds from Zeit News, such as feeds from people that discuss issues regarding societal breakdown. There will be a lot of things that I think people will find interest with. And in many ways, this type of external data flow has been what's missing from the main site, at least as far as emphasis. And the emphasis has been more kind of like a community issue with the forum and just a general hub of information. In order to keep attention and, of course, to maintain intellectual progress, we need to get more active with the data flow. And one of the results of this, which I think some, again, will object to, but it really does allow for new possibilities if you're willing to think about this as far as energy is concerned. The forum that we currently have on the main site will likely not exist in the new site. What we want to do instead, considering the purpose of the forum, is actually have a series of entry forums for specific data points that will come into the system. The moderators that are currently banging their heads against the forum will move into helping sort data and working with data that's submitted to us, so we can use that data and present that data to the public much in the same way that the forum is used for news, such as our societal breakdown section, which is very, very popular and, of course, very contextually relevant, such as technological developments. The banter that exists on this site, for those that really do like to be on these forums, I think can spread to the local chapter sites, which it's up to them, of course, if they want to have forums or not. But I think more importantly and more effectively, these discussions need to spread to the social network sites. So think about it this way. Think about, instead of this sort of little hub where everyone's sharing data and kind of conversing in a general way, which can be very comfortable, it can also be very tedious and complex with a lot of interfering people. As an open forum, we tend to get a lot of individuals that don't know something or might even have malicious intent, and that's unfortunate. But anyway, the question really is, to make this short and sweet, what does the forum do? Is the forum actually operating correctly as far as making projects? Are people really using the forum for purposes that are constructive? And I think overall, apart from a good community, it really isn't serving that role. It would be wonderful to see the energy spent on the forum spent data mining and helping to compile data that's so important to spreading this message and continuing research. Spreading your message to Facebook and to other networks or even other forums is also a very, very important thing to do if you are interested in the internet community activism, such like that. My personal opinion, I don't particularly care for forums. It might just be because I spend too much time on a computer as it is. I post things to our forum, that's about it, though I never engage any other type of forum. But that's me, though. But other people are very much into that. So you have to figure out where your comfort zone is. And in the end, we just want to try to get this information out there, and the new site will be focused on external information flow. In fact, the new site will not even have users at this stage. It will be a data site. There will be no logins for this. Now, there are logins for other satellite sites, our blog, other sites that are emerging, of course, the Media Project site. But this hub, the Zeitgeist Movement Global, is the main hub. It's the domain that's put everywhere. This has to be very clean and concise and simple with an external data flow that's very, very consistent and very informative. And this is where all my energy is going to go to once the smoke clears. Now, coming back to those that have been working and trying to develop an infrastructure that could be more efficient, the ZeitgeistMovement.com Global is separate, in effect, from all chapter sites. You have ZeitgeistMovement.com Global, which is a major hub, again, for data relay. And then you have the chapter sites, which serve a mildly different role. The chapter sites can have RSS feeds from our site or other sources. They can, of course, have a forum if they choose to for their social community. They engage their own mailing lists, of course. These are what the chapter sites essentially do. They're different from the global site. And I do believe that Open Atrium and these Drupal concepts that have been put forward by what's been called the Phoenix Project, these are great ideas. I think the chapter sites might be able to utilize those things in time. But I do want to remind everybody that redundancy sort of exists in a haphazard way within the movement by not having a centralized structure. The major issue is, we really need better efficiency with our mailing lists and things like this, and that will come. But I worry that if we have a unified structure, say one server, even if it's a cloud server, and all this stuff is on one server, it leaves it a little bit more vulnerable in the event that, say 50, 60 chapter sites go down at once. And in the event of any one chapter site going down, in fact, actually, I'll interrupt myself. We had a series of sites go down in the U.S. state chapters. We do actually have a unified platform for many of the state chapters, which works to a certain degree, but we had a huge problem recently where a bunch of these sites went down. And it goes to show the tedium of it. And there is a requirement by anyone who's maintaining these sites to have a professionalism to it, and it's very inexpensive to maintain a little website that doesn't have a high data bandwidth, which I think most chapters, they're not hitting millions of people a day or anything like that. So it's very affordable, and if the person who runs it is competent, there really shouldn't be a problem as long as they're staying in touch with it. Again, I do support the concept of a unified structure, but it's a little bit tricky because of the lack of redundancy. And there might be some fail-safes to that I'm not familiar with. So it's all open in that regard. So I support that idea. So don't think I'm not, for those that are listening, that have been put forward this energy to make this type of structure, which is the Phoenix Project and other ideas that have been put forward out there. So I'm going to not belabor that anymore, but I think everyone will appreciate the new site coming up, the global site, and then we'll begin to continue efficiency and expand as we go along. But the first priority now is data, getting our presence constant in an outward flow. Speaking of data, what do we have here in the Zeitgeist Movement? We have 2 event days. We have Zeitgeist Day, doing very, very well every year with hundreds and hundreds of events. We have the new Zeitgeist Media Festival, a different type of concept, a little more open to pull in artistic interest, to give an environment for social change that isn't necessarily strapped with, intellectual data that can scare people away. We have the town halls, a very, very effective tool. We've been doing very, very well in Los Angeles with those. We always have roughly 100, I think upwards of up to 200 people at certain points for those events. These are really effective methods that we're using. However, as another global event, a third one to add into this, there is the Global Redesign Institute. And more than a global event or a conference, in fact, this is an ultimate think tank. all of you out there that are really interested in community engagement, that are spending, for example, say so much time on the Zeitgeist website structure, the back-end structure, that while might create efficiency, isn't necessarily helping a particular project in the data sense. I would love to see this energy be moved towards this type of concept, a online wiki approach, if you will, and a graphic orientation to a complete structural redesign of, well, human society, technically. This doesn't deal with values. This doesn't deal with anything but what's technically possible with the consideration of efficiency throughout all decisions, and, of course, sustainability, which is more or less synonymous with efficiency if you think about it. This is going to be very, very important. This is what will basically, well, actually perfectly candid, this element is what extrapolates what we drew from the Venus Project. The Venus Project as institution really wasn't the recognition that was promoted, and fortunately that's the way I think a lot of people kind of felt it existed as, but that isn't what any institution is. No institution is an institution in and of itself in an intellectual sense. All it is a data set. So the data concept of an efficient, sustainable social design has its own logic and merit, doesn't need any titles to it, doesn't need the Venus Project, doesn't need a particular individual at the hub, doesn't need the approval from any one thing. It's a logical basis. And the Global Redesign Project is an attempt to create a platform, a community platform, again, in a wiki type of approach, which is to be worked out technically, where people can begin to address how to reconstruct society from the ground up, from the plotting of where resources are, to where infrastructure would be best suited, to where energy, for instance, different forms of energy, different areas, have different propensities as far as what is indigenous, if you will, to those particular regions, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's tidal. These are very, very obvious, and you can see the scope can get very, very complex, but the logic is beautiful. And if a number of years go by and we're able to generate this type of data, generate blueprints, if you will, even they don't have to be super specific, and generate conferences with these blueprints to show the public, here's a technical redesign. Now, you can't do this with money. You can't do this maybe with your values that you have now, but here it is. This is what's possible if you wanted it, and it would be completely sustainable. And I really believe that as time moves forward and the breakdown continues, people are going to be searching for these types of answers because they're not going to find them in the political sphere or anything like that. And I'll talk a little bit more about the societal breakdown issues that are happening right now in a moment. So the Global Redesign Institute is, again, brought up frequently, and after the Media Festival, this is going to be where I hope the developers team and a lot of people can begin to focus energy. This is my suggestion. I wish I had the money to just pull in 10 or 15 people to really knock this out with an extreme dedication. Unfortunately, with the volunteer system, which is amazing, by the way, I don't put anyone down who's volunteering, we're limited with time, and it's always chaotic like that. But this is critical. This is very, very critical. So more on that as we move forward. Since I mentioned societal breakdown, I hope everyone is paying attention with everything that's been stated, everything that's been foreshadowed by the Zeitgeist Movement, others that have talked about these issues. I was in the process of breaking down our orientation guide, which I've had to put to the side because of all the other things going on. I realized that, first of all, I'm reducing it by about 60% to very, very simple language. But I was amazed to kind of go back through our 2008 orientation guide to see how accurate some of the calls were with respect to the economic structure, both from technological unemployment to the debt collapse. The only thing missing was essentially the energy issue, which wasn't foreshadowed, even at least not in the document. It's fascinating to see that, and it's frightening to me to see how oblivious the political institutions and, of course, the commercial institutions are to what's happening. And I really hope, if anything I can reiterate, is when things start to get worse and worse, people really attempt to keep a certain balance. And violence is the worst thing you can possibly engage, especially against a fearful establishment at this point, with the tear gas and various weapons that are always there, and the more violence that occurs, the more violence that will be opposed. that will be imposed, on the public. Anyway, so these issues are continuing to spread, and there's been no alleviation. I was reading, Obama's little thing on Labor Day about, you just read this stuff, and if you ever read Tyranny of Words by Stuart Chase, you see that the man will stand there and talk and say absolutely nothing. Nothing. No causal recognition. It has to do, they complain about bipartisan issues and things like that, and it's just so frustrating, and I'm not even going to belabor it because I'll just get angry and start rambling on. But, I really hope, if anything, during this time, those that are following this data and understand the problems will begin to actively, again, back to my original point at the beginning of this broadcast with respect to data flow, actively start to communicate this issue. That's what it's all about, guys. If you can't change people's understandings and values, you can't change the society. This isn't about creating an institution, an army, or whatever of the Zeitgeist Movement that forces themselves into, some type of social change. The Zeitgeist Movement, in its largest manifestation, is the change. It's like the Gandhi quote, "Become the change you want to see." If everyone, quote, was in the Zeitgeist Movement on the planet, there wouldn't be a Zeitgeist Movement because everything would already be changed. I hope you understand that. There really isn't a Zeitgeist Movement. It's the ultimate anti-institution. It's really just the value system and understanding these very fundamental elements and following the trains of thought that arise from these recognitions. So I'm going to leave it at that as far as the societal breakdown. I can go into a lot of details, but it's not worth the time because I think we all know what we're seeing, those that are at least paying attention. And I'm going to do some Q&As here in a second, but the last thing I want to talk about has to do with disinformation on the Internet and the history of what is traditionally called COINTELPRO, which is basically provocateur activity. Now, we've seen a lot of this in pockets. We see it from radio talk show hosts that have been against us. We've seen it from bloggers. We see it on YouTube videos. There's a lot of stuff like this. And what I want everyone to do that is interested in this subject, because I find it fascinating, is to do some research on it, is to punch up the history of these types of operations, whether it's by government, whether it's by financed institutions, because it isn't just government that engages this. There are institutions that will pay groups of people to perform in certain ways. Just as, for example, there are online, what are these things online? There are these institutions online that will actually work to try and help you get a better reputation on the Internet. I'm sure you've seen these. There are adverse institutions that do the exact opposite. Of course, you don't see them advertised as publicly. Propaganda and this so-called, gesturally speaking, COINTELPRO, which is really the name of a particular kind of operation approach that I don't think exists anymore, but obviously the tactic still exists, is amazing. If you look at Martin Luther King, you look at Gandhi, or if you look at the Black Panthers, you look at any of the civil rights stuff, and you see the declassified documents that came out with respect to the FBI's activity in creating and generating disinformation, character assassination. It's fascinating to see what they were doing, and even more fascinating to see how it mirrors a lot of the activity you see on the Internet against us. Now, that doesn't mean that those that engage this activity are a part of something. I could talk a little bit about information about sponsored websites and money that's being generated for some of these individuals, but that's really moot. It really doesn't matter because once you recognize the tactics, it all becomes transparent, and all the tactics are logically the same. You have character assassination, you have divide and conquer, you have instigation, you have people that will try to generate violence or the illusion of violence. These are classic tactics. You see these in protest movements, proven, many different agents of provocateur, as they would be called, that will take a peaceful rally and they'll begin to initiate violent activity to make the entire group look bad. These are all things that all of us should be aware of because it's going to continue to happen. My own character assassinations are rampant, and I find it hilarious. I admit I'm a bit sadistic, but every time I go into my Google alerts or I go to YouTube, about once every 2 weeks I go through and I kind of check what's been going on. I'm always a little disappointed if there isn't some super hate thing calling me a cult leader or something like that. It's always amusing just to see how desperate these institutions or individuals really are, where they have to create such vehement appearances, which to any thinking individual has no effect whatsoever. But they're there to create discomfort for those that are not stable in their worldview, that don't want to seem like they're associated with something that isn't, that doesn't have integrity. And those that have those type of feeble-mindedness really probably aren't ready for the Zeitgeist Movement to begin with. So the whole issue is basically moot. But it is important to understand it when you see these tactics. And as I just mentioned, it's prima facie association straw men. That's what I call the circus. Those are the first things to occur. And I hope I'm not mumbling too much. I am a bit delirious at this point. Please check out, say, FBI COINTELPRO against Martin Luther King. You'll blow your mind to see what the FBI was trying to do to him. And this wasn't just the FBI. There are all sorts of other, quote, COINTELPRO individuals out there that tried to get King to commit suicide, that would try to guilt him, and they claimed to be from the black community, try to do anything they could to alienate and disturb this individual, and of course he was far too strong for that. If you look back in history, for those that do feel uncomfortable with some of the stuff that they find on the internet, remember that every single group that has ever attempted to do something or even succeeded to do something positive, that actually accomplished something, all of them were considered to be the absolute antichrist of their period, attacked on every single level. So keep that in mind. Martin Luther King's book, Testament of Hope, is what I always go back to when I feel like the whole world's sort of coming down, because nothing any of us have ever gone through will compare to what that individual or the people that influenced him went through. So anyone out there that feels like they're being abused, you snap out of it and grow up, because this is what you're involved in. And you want to challenge anything in the establishment has to offer, you better get some tough skin, because you're going to lose friends. You're going to have people come at you from all sides. So, how dare you degrade the value systems that are dominant and that define all these people's identities. But in time, with the pressures that are emerging, this will change. It will change, so don't let it get to you. And keep some humor with it. That's what I do. And the final talking point before I go into your questions, of course, is the Zeitgeist Media Festival coming up this weekend. Big happenings. Please go to your local festival if there's one near you. This turned out to be a really beautiful event, network, if you will. We have events in Alaska, Canada, Chicago, Slovakia, Germany, Peru, Sweden, Argentina, Phoenix, Arizona in the States, Colombia, Mexico, Romania, Ireland, the UK, of course, British Columbia, France, Toronto, Chile, Mexico, Belgium, another one in Colombia, Venezuela, Australia, Indonesia, New Hampshire, Ecuador, Portland, Oregon. The LA event has a number of different levels to it, which I'm very, very happy about. We have the food bank support, which should be extremely positive on multiple levels. If you go to zeitgeistmediafestival.org, you'll see the other food banks that are in partnership with the event's regional, in other words, related to the Zeitgeist Media Festival events in that region, from Philadelphia to Latin America to Chicago. There's a lot of those. We also have NPOs that are involved in the Los Angeles event, and a few other ones that I've seen emailed to me for other events that are happening, other mirrored events, such as Inside Out Community Arts, these are Next Aid, Venice Arts, KPFK Radio. These are, apart from KPFK Radio, these NPOs work with arts to try and help kids that might gravitate towards drugs or violence in poor communities. Very, very positive. Honored to have them a part of this, and they are honored as well, in fact. The lineup for Los Angeles is truly robust and fun. I can't wait to be a part of this. I get the good fortune of being able to also contribute, which makes me very happy, because for years it's been years since I've had a chance to do something outside of the film series. But anyway, I won't belabor it, but we have a really powerful thing happening here. Lots of press coming in, lots of interviews that are pending, a lot of celebrity interest for showing up. So I hope everyone will go check that out and support the local community. And hopefully by next year we'll have an explosive second annual event, and this will just get larger and larger every year. In a certain sense, I expect this festival to gain more notoriety than Zeitgeist Day, because Zeitgeist Day doesn't have the attraction because it's purely intellectual. This gives a certain leniency to different levels of understanding and awareness as far as social concern is concerned. and it's very powerful from that standpoint. So please support your local community with that. That's coming up this Sunday as far as LA. It's going to be web streamed live. That stream will be posted through Stickum. And so if you can't make it and you want to watch it, can't make it to one in your area, punch in. We'll have an 8-hour stream on Sunday. And by the way, for those that are talking about 9/11, this isn't about 9/11, of course, but I do want to say in a poetic sense that they're going to be doing the whole 9/11 drudgery all day with all of the testimonials and this gigantic illusion that this event had more destructive power than about 99% of all other aberrant events, from the world wars to the disease epidemics to car accidents. And it's truly quite insulting to see how the media uses this for their own purposes, not to mention the government institutions and their necessity to generate fear and maintain that to preserve themselves as an ultimate staple of this warmongering attribute to feel like you need the state, which of course we don't. So I won't belabor that one, but I think it's beautiful to see the people coming out for this to say, you know what, I'm not going to sit at home and watch planes crash into towers all day. I think I'm going to do something constructive, and I hope everyone else will feel that way too. But that's an aside. Okay, let's jump into questions. I noticed some of you here on the forum have gone into specifics in a way that doesn't quite enable me to respond in a way that's direct, but we'll play it as it goes. Question 1 has to do with the website that was made, and the question is about the effectiveness of changing society through, quote, making idea sharing easier to make people not only aware of other people's ideas but understand them as well, not just the ideas themselves but the ways of thinking. The function of the site is to enable people to share their ideas and discuss them with anyone, much like YouTube, but with text. I think I don't have time to look at the website in detail at the moment, obviously, but the premise of what you described sounds great. Obviously, it's all about getting people to understand trains of thought and making certain connections, not rote data, so I agree. As far as your question, is it okay if I put a link to the Zeitgeist Movement on each page of the website? Anyone can link to the Zeitgeist Movement. I mean, there's no restriction on that. It's only in very rare cases of abuse or disinformation or something that the trademark for the Zeitgeist Movement would be utilized to protect the movement. Anyway, number 2, why are people lazy today and why won't they be in a resource-based economy? Interesting question. Well, you say, why are people lazy today? Not everyone's lazy. Some people are lazy in certain ways. Other people are lazy in other ways. Some people are extremely active, extremely dedicated all the time. There are a number of different cultural factors in play, essentially. If you look at cultural qualifications, the U.S. culture with its obesity epidemics and things of such, there's a TV culture, by the way. You begin to ask yourself, why is this culture, which is really the same set of human beings, the immigrants, in fact, that came from many different cultures, why are we so different than the behavioral patterns of others? And that reveals that there's something going on in the culture. And I attribute it in large part, as denoted in Zeitgeist Moving Forward, to the labor system, which produces nothing. It's a waste of life. People realize that. I know it firsthand from working in advertising. I'd come home, and even with the type of kind of conditioning I've had to be project-oriented, you have periods where you just don't want to do anything. You come back out of your private dictatorship, you feel humiliated and debased, you've produced nothing but paper or advertisements. You see people wasting $30,000 on an ad, which could easily have fed a bunch of homeless people, yet it goes towards a shoe ad that someone will see once and then completely forget about. So you can see why people begin to feel kind of lack of motivation in circumstances like that. So when you realize it's cultural in a resource-based economy with a completely different upbringing of the culture, with completely different reinforcements and the emphasis on social contribution, with that reward coming back to you with the material abundance, gravitation towards that material abundance, gravitation towards removal of laws and greater freedom and all the things that go along with the environment that would result from the type of structural changes that can be made, you can imagine a very, very different sense of motivation. I believe in the future the type of volunteering we see, say, with the fire departments and the pockets. I mean, I think the stat was, it's in the orientation guide, that 50% of Americans volunteer at some point for X number of hours, which is pretty astounding when the most stratified and most cutthroat nation on the planet, at least in a sense, well, maybe that's debatable these days, but historically so on average. That's amazing to see the spirit of people in that attempt to want to do something social and beneficial. And I think that takes hold, and that's what people look back upon and actually appreciate about themselves. No one's going to look back, even if they're a multimillionaire, look back on their lives and say, oh, look at that great ad I made that was run for 2 days and everyone forgot about, but yet I made $500,000 off of. They're going to think about things they did to actually create viable contribution. They're going to think about in a cheesy sense, that the woman that they helped across the street, or the homeless person that they were able to help get a job, and things like that. This is what people really want. They want that connection, I think, deep down. People that abuse, they're the ones that always end up in the most misery in the end. It might not happen immediately because of how powerful culture is, but everyone I ever known that's very exploitative, they're very, very unhappy with themselves over time. Okay, number 3. Hi, PJ. What do you think about Derek Jensen, the new deep green resistance, and their critique of industrial civilization in cities which require the importation of resources being fundamentally unsustainable and eco-genocidal? That's the first part of his question, and I say I know of those institutions, but I'd have to learn more detail. But the statement that you just made, I would consider to be accurate, so I would have to agree in gesture. He continues, they suggest creating a culture of resistance both above and underground, along with targeting vulnerable energy infrastructure being the most effective way to stop it. I know your stance on violence, but do you truly think this culture will undergo a voluntary shift without direct action being taken to stop these sociopaths in power from stealing from the poor and destroying the planet? It seems to me that we don't have time to wait for the voluntary shift. End of question. Well, as I've stated many times, we're not just sitting here spreading information, waiting for everyone to just change their values. There's obviously going to be actions that have to be taken, which will come in the form of civil disobedience, which are not violent, obviously. So I don't believe in any type of deliberate kind of disruption that engages anything that would be considered violent. There are plenty of other means that can disrupt the patterns of governments or corporations without resulting to violence. It has to do with mass civil disobedience. So obviously some type of action probably will be taken. You can't foresee that. And also I want to reiterate that, we can demean people as sociopaths and such, but the CEOs of corporations, the people in power in government, they really believe what they're doing. I think John Perkins said it best, that he quote, he's never met a CEO that really wanted to do harm, but it's the way the market system and everything is set up. These people are victims of culture. They're not just outright sociopaths. There might be a few of them, but that's not the normal state. These people are just operating based on the values that are there. Monsanto, as sick as that institution is simply the ultimate manifestation of what the free enterprise system wishes for and demands. Next question. Any thoughts about the relativistic idea that personal beliefs won't influence one's behavior and will therefore be of no greater relevance to the group? Like, quote, your beliefs in government and pseudoscience, etc., don't matter as long as you consider yourself a member, unquote. Won't this cognitive dissonance dilute our ideals, even if it manages to appeal to more people? Diplomatic members try to compromise, even if it is opinion versus fact. Why avoid honest discussion just to attract people that wouldn't agree with our ideas if they really knew them? Wow, that's a mouthful. Well, let's see here. I think you're making a series of assumptions. First of all, if you want to engage in any type of educational process, you have to be open to people that come from different places and have different ideas. There really isn't such a classification as a member of the Zeitgeist Movement. This is a little strange to say, but there really isn't such a thing. There's no forms to fill out. There's a basic acceptance of the of the thesis we promote and the observations. Does that mean everyone believes exactly the same thing? Well, that's impossible, at least in this current climate. we can barely find any general agreement in the culture at large today. So if you want to create a mass movement, you have to be a lot more open-minded towards different beliefs and different value systems, with the assumption that those coming into this will continue their educational process and will overcome those beliefs that are not supported, and will pick up beliefs and understandings that are scientifically valid. So there's your process. And I know from personal experience that's all walks. I meet people with tremendous scientific advanced knowledge, or even people that don't have like PhDs, but they have a tremendous intuition. They have a very straightforward way of looking at things and making decisions. I have also met people on the other side of the spectrum that have a very metaphysical view, but their values are actually utterly in line, but they have a very strange metaphysical and pseudoscience relationship. All of this stuff has to be dealt with. I personally am extremely candid with anybody. I don't dilute my message, and I will tell anyone straightforward what I think of their ideas, whether they are supported by reasoning and facts or not. But that doesn't mean that because someone believes something that I don't, that I dismiss them. We're all in different stages, so keep that in mind. Next question. How do we keep the top 1% from corrupting the formation of a resource-based economy, and what can we do to safeguard that they don't turn it into a system that gives them similar control with even greater anonymity than now? This is a very common question regarding corruption and power consolidation. A lot of people assume that this type of system would generate even larger power consolidation, but that has very little basis if there is a general acceptance of the system. Now, if there's a subculture of people that simply don't accept the system, that's a whole different subject. But when you have a system laid out like this, where your involvement in labor always has a social return, everyone else's involvement always has a direct social return to you, where there is a level playing field, so to speak, where the access, the mechanization used, and the resource management used is so efficient that access abundance is generated, these values will very much change the way people behave. And the consolidation of power, I think, would be the least of people's concerns in this regard. I don't see why the motivation would be there, I guess is my point. You'd have to provide an example of what type of corruption. The control that they have now is different because the value system comes from money and greed, and this socially Darwinistic pattern and assumption that has been prevalent in human society for thousands of years because of the outgrowth of scarcity and the limited understanding of science and technology at that point. It was a very primitive elements, and we're still in that. People are triggering their lower R complex constantly in their brain because of this system that doesn't really allow for those higher level thought processes and to learn how to work together. It's not reinforced by the social system. So let me read your question again to make sure that I didn't miss anything. The safeguard against this system is the design of the system itself. And that's for, again, a much larger conversation, which I think I've addressed numerous times because that question's been asked many, many different times. But I'll say in conclusion to that, if you can generate an environment where there's no reward for corruption, then the corruption can't exist. You don't see random corruption. Random corruption doesn't exist. Even the most bizarre cases of abuse from one individual to another or to a group has a root cause and a motivation. People are rational, even though on the surface it might seem irrational, but if you trace it far enough back, there is a causality. And the very fact that this system would choose to recognize that causality would be another factor. In its design, inevitably, that would limit the type of corruption that you're pointing out. On a tangible level, though, I will say that the redundancy that's built into the system, the localization, the disconnection, apart from having a global resource management system, the actual processes of producing food and everything else are localized. So if someone was to take hold and mess up, a certain region's city system, that could occur. I don't think it'd be common, but if it did happen, well, obviously a move has to be made. This isn't a utopia, but the people would say, okay, what are you doing? You can't do this. You're disrupting our food supply. We can't get access to this. The people would rise up and do whatever they needed to do to make sure that individual or whatever group isn't doing what they're doing. And that would be perhaps in part where the limited police force would exist. We want to move towards a situation where there's less and less police because there's no reason for them. Does that mean police would never exist? Not anytime soon, even if we transition tomorrow. There's a massive, massive cultural evolution here that needs to happen. But we know it's feasible because we see it in patterns of behavior with human society today in pockets. And we look in history and we see these patterns too. Okay, so I could belabor that and go on a whole different tangent from different angles, but I hope I answered your question. There's no reward for the corruption. Corruption doesn't exist. There's far too much reward for corruption in the current system. And in fact, every element of monetary gain is indeed corrupt because it's based on exploitation one way or another. And that generates a cycle of abuse that just ensures different layers of corruption. Next question. Hi, Peter. My country is a third world and a developing country, and I believe that most of these countries' lack of activism presence, this is broken English, lack activism presence, not just the Zeitgeist Movement. What do you think of creating a medium that connects people to the reality as one of the ways to wake people up? For example, a video that shows the person sleeping and then shows where the bed comes from, where it's made, what it's made of. Okay, to paraphrase this question, there's actually a number of books out there that do talk about how think goods are made. The Story of Stuff is one. There's a few other ones that I've read regarding, learning those issues. Because your English is a little bit broken, I think I get it, though. There are books out there. I recommend The Story of Stuff. She doesn't have any solutions, really, at least not in the long term, but it's a very good book as far as learning about how stuff is made and, of course, the pollutants that are in it because of the market system and cost efficiency and everything else. To make a video on it, well, the Story of Stuff video actually is pretty good, too, for that purpose. But I completely agree with your logic. There's a very large disconnect. People don't really see the causality where their stuff comes from, not to mention the processes, not only the resources, but the slave labor, the chemical elements that are applied, and again, all that stuff that we talk about at length. But there's only so much I can do right now. Next question. Do you feel the key to shifting the general social mindset lies in concentrated local community engagement, such as events, activism, discussion, or larger widespread media projects, such as music, art, and cinema, which can affect people on an emotional or subconscious level? If you had time to choose between dedicating time and effort to one over the other, which do you feel will be more effective in the long run? Good question. Well, local community engagement really depends on the content. So events, activism, discussion, or lectures, intellectual stuff, obviously that has its place. Media projects, art, cinema has a very powerful effect, hence the Zeitgeist Media Project. At this point in time, because of the general anti-intellectualism you see in society, the latter, the emotional issues are more relevant, which is why the films are more effective. More people are going to see those than, say, the lectures. Even the lectures might have more clarity, be more direct. So I would say, the emotional issue as of now, but that really needs to lead to the community engagements and direct lecture-oriented, direct intellectual information. Next question, excuse me. No, that's actually a response question. That's another response question. Okay, Peter, do you believe a study in the social behavioral sciences would benefit people better than a study in technology when it comes to understanding something like a resource-based economy? Yes, absolutely. You can show people what's possible technologically, and very often they'll fall back on, well, if we can create an abundance for everybody, that would be socialism, and therefore we can't do that because it's against human nature. There's your common argument that often I hear. It's broad assumptions, and it's devoid of any kind of research regarding behavioral sciences. So I couldn't agree more. You'd have to get people to understand themselves, the development, see their own anthropological history, look at what modern brain science has to show, look at the research, people like Sapolsky and many others, and to draw this very simple reality that we have a tremendous malleability. It doesn't really take a genius to see that malleability in the end, and that's the most important part. It doesn't mean that we don't have tendencies that can be very, very negative. But the fact is, those tendencies have to be brought out. You deprive someone long enough, they'll behave in a very, very negative way. If you support someone and give them good reinforcement, they can behave very, very amiable and very, very different. It's easy to see the intuition. It reminds me of an element of the Steven Pinker book, The Blank Slate. The book it's a very, very good treatment on a general summary and investigation of different subgenres of human behavioral sciences. And from that standpoint, it's great. But the bias of Pinker comes out quite extensively in the way he treats certain scenarios. For example, he denotes a section about this in peaceful indigenous culture that were brought into military environment. I believe they were forced into it to engage in warfare. And they were complete pacifists in their local communities, and they'd never engaged in violence. But when they were brought into this violent environment, they turned around very, very rapidly, and they became very, very violent, and in almost an exaggerated sense. And this was denoted by other anthropological research that he sources. His argument, if I remember correctly, was that, this must prove that we have deep-seated negative tendencies, regardless of if we live in a passive environment. Now, that's true on a certain level, but that kind of voids the real observation, is that if the environment is what's dictating whether we're going to be pacifist or super negative, and if you can't just dismiss someone's passivity just because they happen to be negative in a different environment. So I hope that makes sense. I think you understand that since you asked the question. But there's a weird, convoluted perspective out there as far as human behavior, and usually people just believe what they see around them. So if you're brought up in a very violent, poor community, that's your assumption about the way life might be. And you might carry that bias into a pacifist community, and it might disturb things because you're not used to that environment. So, very good question. And next question. I would like to put the following idea out there for people to discuss. Counseling, I think this is one of the best ways to reach people, especially those who have tough emotional or mental problems and need help instead of drugs. Perhaps any ZM members out there with the expertise and qualifications to provide counseling services could do this. Just putting this idea out there. Any thoughts? Well, that's fascinating. I know some individuals out there that do work with kids, for example. That's a beautiful program. That's a little beyond what we're doing right now. But anyone out there listening that would want to do that, obviously, regardless of TZM or not, that's a very noble thing to do. Next question. Sorry for mistakes. My English isn't first language. That are you thinking about Anonymous? I guess that's what are you thinking about Anonymous? To answer that question, I think I've commented on Anonymous a number of times. Anonymous serves a number of unique roles, and I commend certain attributes of it, but it isn't a solution, and it seems to be based on the rhetoric that I've seen about sort of a retribution. Now, what is the motto? We never forgive, we never forget. I hope I had that right. That's a strange value system to put forward if you recognize how human culture is developed. We need to. Well, as an institution, there has to be a tangible relationship. And while I really love the actions of Anonymous in pockets, is it really going to alleviate the actual system itself, the problems that are generating the system, the problems that are emerging out of the system that is generating those problems? And that's the question I pose. I get tons of emails from people claiming to be from Anonymous, most in support, and I don't know what to do with them. I can't actually believe them. I mean, I get trolled with emails constantly anyway, so I have to be very, very careful, and I just pick and choose who I waste my time with, who I spend time with, in the hope I don't waste time with someone claiming to be something or know somebody. Usually when someone makes those claims, I always ignore them anyway, because it's just too difficult to verify. Next part, what do you think about CollapseNet? I think CollapseNet does a great job. I was on Michael Rupert's show a couple of days ago, and I think they do very, very well with the observations about what's happening. Number 4, that you are thinking about a human cybernation. Let me read this because of the broken English. It might be. Okay, this is about singularity. It seems like a Ray Kurzweil view regarding the merger of machine and man because of the evolution of the evolution of technology. This is a very complicated question regarding conscious machines and things that are, advocated in part by the Singularity Institute and the work of Ray Kurzweil as far as the exponential increase in science and technology, specifically technology, artificial intelligence, where we have to kind of merge with machine if we're going to keep up with things, so to speak. First thing I'd say is, if you wear glasses, you're merging yourself with the machine. So those that have this kind of weird bias against such a notion need to think more practically regarding application of technology to themselves. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with respect to all of that. It's a complicated question. Frankly, I don't give much thought to it at this stage because there's so many other problems on the horizon. Figuring out that reality is the least of my concerns. But I do find it fascinating, and given that technology is phasing out human labor in and of itself, as it should, because of our proficiency to create machines that are more effective than we are at a given skills. I don't see how we will not actually start to redesign ourselves and make ourselves more efficient. It would just seem like a natural progression. Let's see, next question. Hey Peter, a couple questions. One, you mentioned in a radio address a few months ago that you were thinking of having Z-Day 2012 in Madison Square Garden. Is that still being considered as a possibility? Well, I kind of priced that out, and the amount of money to rent even the smaller arena, not the arena, but the theater in Madison Square Garden is really ridiculous. And in order to take that kind of risk to break even on that is going to take probably another year of confidence building and a really specific strategy to make sure that people will actually attend. Because it's just too risky. I don't have the money to do that. And I think getting the money, even if we raise the pool to do that in part, it might be a waste of money in a certain sense, given what we can do with that money if it's lost. It's a big difference between if it's not lost and it's actually we actually get the money back. That's the role of any Zeitgeist event, is just you keep these things break even. Anyway, I would love to see that happen. It's not going to happen for 2012, but, there's other avenues out there. We'll see what happens. Number two, did you still have plans to make a film about the military, what its actual purpose is, and encouraging people not to support the institution as a departure from the Zeitgeist film series? Yes. In fact, I was pondering making two films on the side. I was actually considering making a series of shorts, but, the Zeitgeist film series will continue, and I'll probably eventually... The fourth one takes place before the third one, if that makes any sense as far as the narrative. And then the fifth one will be the live action with the people living in the society. I put that one off out of respect to the Venus Project and this what it was really a very juvenile objection. Why I don't even want to go into it actually, because it's ridiculous. Odds are I'll probably have the fifth film out before they have any film out. And you have to ask yourself a question in that equation. Would you rather not have anything out at all? And as an aside, I wasn't actually intending to make their film at all. I was going to take a variation of their film. I'm not going to go down that road and all the distortion and confusion that was generated by that whole subject. Not even worth the time. But I do like the idea of making a film about the military and making a film about advertising. So that's on the plate. We'll see how it goes. There's a possibility they might be shorts, though, but we'll see what happens. And I'm actually going to stop here. These are all the questions I had printed out. So if you have more questions, we'll just set up another thing for the next radio show that I'm on. I will continue the rotation, actually, so we'll figure out who will be next. But everyone, please go out and support the Zeitgeist Media Festivals in your regions if there is one, and thank you all for those that have the courage to put this on. I know it has been difficult, and I want to commend everybody for their fortitude with all of this. It's truly phenomenal what's happening. I hope everyone can appreciate that, despite the developments, despite any type of controversy, despite any of the tensions that emerge, despite what's happened in the history of the movement. It's really, really amazing and unprecedented what's happening with all of this. And there's a lot of new stuff coming out as far as the new orientation guide, the new orientation video, a quick start guide, the revision of the global site into, as I described earlier, a a data feed ultimately. A lot of very professional elements are going to be coming forward to help ease this, and new ways to navigate online involvement for all of us so we can continue this type of progress. So everyone take care, and I will talk to you all soon, and please tap into the Zeitgeist Media Festival free web stream this Sunday if you have nothing else to do and you don't want to sit there and stare at the television as the media exploits the death of 3,000 people for the 10th year in support of distorted value system that has a hegemonic overtone. Thank you very much.